Thank you, Jordan. Our last speaker this morning is Kate Hanna. Kate's the project lead for the Disinformation project at Te Punaha Matatini, a research centre devoted to the study of complex systems, and we've already seen a very good graphic description of what a complex system looks like from Sanjana. She's also been engaged as a New Zealand contributor to the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, and as a humanities scholar working in Auckland University's Physics Department. Grabbing those two things and holding them together is actually really interesting for this work. Kate's work has great resonance with the complexity that we see in society and the internet. Kate.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's great just when you say you're a historian in a physics department. It usually confuses everybody. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. No Wales, Scotland, Gloucestershire, Dorset, O. Ko Innismon te motu, ko Minotaur te maunga, no Hughes, Mackenzie, Appley, Edmonds, aho. Ko Kate Hanna, toku ingoa. Mein durg genif en ek al goled. For each of those who are lost, to all of those who are harmed, to all the families whose tables are missing a loved one, I'm here in Otautahi to work with you, and Otautahi, I'm here to be useful. Nothing else. Let me start with a quote from Alan Kernow's Landfall in Unknown Seas, which was written in 1942. The sailor lives and stands beside us, paying out into time's wave the stain of blood that writes an island story. The stain of blood that writes an island story has at its heart an image of imperialism. The imperial project rolled out from Europe over centuries and formed and shaped by the doctrine of discovery is the foundation of the structures and systems of New Zealand. These underlying and frequently invisibilised structures, imperialism, colonisation, white supremacism, misogyny, Islamophobia, homophobia, anti-Semitism, they also underpin the human and technical features of life online. The digital world reflects the structural and systemic violences towards the other that form the basis of the physical world we all inhabit. Online harm, hateful or violent expression and actions, and disinformation are global issues, and like all other global issues, they are shaped innately by imperialism, and their effects are not experienced evenly in communities, within societies, or between nations. And really critically here, their impacts are most felt within communities which have experienced the most significant effects of that imperial project. Here in Aotearoa, communities targeted with harmful content and hateful or violent expression and action include Māori, Pacifica diaspora communities, Muslim communities, Chinese diaspora communities, refugee and migrant communities, LGBTQIA+ communities, particularly trans communities, and peoples living with the experience of disabilities. These communities within Aotearoa are also the target of much of the disinformation present in both national and transnational information ecosystems. And also, alternatively, they often become the focus of disinformation presented to others, largely Pākehā or white migrant communities. So these patterns that we see through the research of online harm targeting Indigenous youth, of hateful and violent expression and action targeting Muslim women, of disinformation addressing directly minoritised communities' experiences of violent state interventions, and then of these communities themselves being blamed for current social and political turmoil, they're global. Sara Ahmed describes in her work on harassment in institutions how the complainant becomes the problem when we call out and note institutional injustices. We become bothersome when we make the complaint. This plays out constantly online in the framing of harm, hate, and the potential for violence. Those who report, or in often cases try to report, become the problem. They are blamed for drawing attention to the invisible structures of violence that are constantly present. So Aotearoa New Zealand is not unaffected by these global patterns. And increasingly what we're seeing through these, there are attempts going on right now in New Zealand to reassess and revise understandings of the impacts of colonisation, the imperial project, and beginnings of the realisation of justice in the framework of te tiriti. And those discourses are being intentionally framed online as sites of national controversy, as sites for a culture war to take place. From Black Lives Matter to Me Too, notions of radicalisation and companion words we've heard mentioned frequently, like extremism and polarisation, are highly contestable and manipulatable. Nearly every past justice movement which has secured a more equal and more representative social democracy has involved language and acts which could have or could still be described as radical, extremist and polarising. Discourse about our safety here in this space in the last 2 days further reveal these competing narratives. Here now in Aotearoa New Zealand, who is the our whose safety and security is at threat? The internet, which is the tools and technologies which form this digital world, has been handmade by machine. It encompasses all of the things that are wrong with our present society. It's a contradiction. Jordan's talked about free and open internets. But I always have to ask, who is it free and open for? By whom was it made? And in whose interests is it so? So for me, the heart of the matter is not the byline of this panel. Online violent and hateful extremism are features of the foundational and ongoing effects of the imperial project on human cultures and societies. The digital world enables these ideas, some of which are ancient and some which are newly developed, to be shared really easily. And then the technical mechanics of things like recommender algorithms, parameterization, content feeds, and the ever important idea of engagement increase what we call the volume and reach of these hateful and violent ideas, expressions, images, languages, and memes. And Anjum very clearly showed, there's no need for me to have slides to show the sort of stuff I come across in my work, because Anjum showed that. Right now in Aotearoa New Zealand, that hateful and violent expression and action is targeting a number of communities in both digital and physical worlds, and we've had some mention of that over the last 2 days. It is specifically white supremacist, misogynistic, and transphobic. Those who it seeks to attract sympathy from, radicalise, if you want to use that word, are Pākehā, or white migrant communities, through placing, as Sarah described yesterday, real or imagined personal grievances within a political framework of racist hate. That kind of material and artefact, which I study, makes its way through other discourses, is discussed in the media and by politicians, by academics and thought leaders and civil society organisations, and in this manner sometimes becomes normalised and legitimised as a topic of discussion. The movement of ideas and themes back and forth through and across digital and physical social networks and via individuals and group narrators enables the development of what we increasingly see as a contestable space, language and narrative and ideas which nearly meet existing criteria for objectionable or harmful or hateful, but which are purposefully playing in a space that doesn't quite get there. They're intentionally designing their words in that manner. We've been asked to offer some practical solutions. It's quite humorous to me as a cultural historian to think I might have something practical to offer, apart from reflections on the past. But for Aotearoa New Zealand, the realisation of the partnership we are provided in Te Tiriti o Waitangi is absolutely central for making any kind of positive change for all New Zealanders in both digital and physical worlds. And this has to start with a reckoning about the fundamental and ongoing impacts of the imperial project. And elements of this are underway. As a historian, the review of the history curriculum is very much an important piece of this reckoning. But it will start from the margins and not the centres. I'm going to conclude, and humour me, with reading a poem by my friend and writer and poet, academic Alex Te Punga Samavel. She wrote this for her talk, which was supposed to be given. She gave a talk in May 2021 as the Michael King Lecture as part of the Writers' Festival in Auckland, a talk entitled Too Many Cooks. But she ran out of time to read this poem, and I'm going to read it now. It's a poem which imagines a shared future. There are captain cooks amongst us too, bullies throwing their weight around. They think they are at the centre of the room, but that's only because they've never been anywhere but there. They have no idea about the edges, or even how far the room extends. One day, they will realise that we in the corners are in other centres. They will realise there are no corners, no walls. Is it a room? Is it a room then when there are no walls? I used to want to tell them to move over because they take up all the room. But there's no room. There is no room. No walls, no room, just links and connections and space. You're not at the centre. There are no centres. You're just standing there, one node in a massive network, like the rest of us.
Thank you, Kate. I think we have some time for questions before we close. I expected to see a number of hands go up, and pleased that has happened. In fact, I'm seeing more go up. If we run out of time in this session for all questions, I know that for myself and others in the panel would be happy to talk with people after the open session. Can we get a mic to some folk? We have a mic, thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel for a very, very good and interesting discussion. I've got a question for the representatives from, well, a comment rather.
Thank you. We've had a few comments or questions. Do any of the panellists wish to offer an observation, or do we want to just leave a bit more space for?
I'd like to obviously completely agree around notions of digital literacy, but want to highlight that clearly the problem isn't just in the digital space, it's in the physical space too. And so what we need is, enriched programs that make sure that young people and people who are older also understand unreliable narration, the way narratives work, when a narrative is trying to appeal directly to you using emotion. I might be a person with an English literature degree, potentially Sanjana is too, perhaps more English literature or other sorts of literature degrees. But it's not just digital literacy, and we do know from work trying to increase things like scientific literacy as a way to shore up democracy, that just singular kind of foci on a particular fact, like science or digital, doesn't actually change the ways in which people interact with information. So it has to be broader than just the idea of digital literacy. And I'm also really keen to make sure we don't just focus on young people, because I think young people are actually doing this brilliantly. In large part, young people are really, really clued up. They ask questions, they are looking at the content, they're asking where it comes from, they're thinking about it. I'm worried about my generation. I'm Generation X, where they're originators of conspiracy theories. And I'm worried about my parents who are in the baby boom generation, those generations who were taught that when you see things online, on the news, that they are therefore real. And so we have to have different types of conversations in different spaces with different generations and not demonise particular groups. And my plea is always broadly for more literacy. Doesn't matter what kind of literacy it is, but words really matter.